we're trying to provide consistent oversight of elections. And what we found is true is that no one can do this but the citizens. The election officials and their whole clan are actually way out of control in many cases and doing the wrong thing and cooperating to do it. We have to have the citizens a lot more involved in this election oversight. There's no way to turn it over to the government to look at itself at this very critical phase. And really, if you're working on some other issue, if we can't get the elections to work correctly, then all bets are off on getting any other issue really to happen most of the time. So we've identified from this thing called the Pareto principle, which is basically the 80-20 rule. You know, if you look at any kind of a problem, about 20% of what you're looking at is going to be dealing with 80% of the effect. It happens in almost everything, and it's certainly true here. We can look at the top 175 districts, which is only 2% of the election districts, and get 50% of the electorate covered. So, but even that's a pretty big ask. We're talking about 175 counties, which is not a trivial number. Since we've done this in San Diego and other areas, we actually branched out in a few places. We found that it's not possible to have one cookie cutter kind of thing. Nothing is the same in each one of these districts. A lot of stuff is the same. Let me say that differently, but not everything is. So essentially, you have to have your teams, ready to adapt to things that are happening there. And as I just said, the top 175 districts give us the 50% of the electorate. But if we go to the 300, we get 60, and the top 500 give us 70. It's kind of interesting. So if we go to 70%, 500 districts, and that's out of about 3,500. So we're not having to do very much percentage-wise to get 70%. That's a big percentage. It turns out that also, when you start working on a given state, you start working on a few more districts just because you're already doing it. And so that's why we sometimes do more in a state. Now this map right here shows you with the colors, just include all of the colors. If you include all the colors, that's the top 175 districts throughout the country. And so this is why, when and you can see these out here, if the red ones are where these are the top population areas. If you looked at like the tip of Florida, Chicago, Southern California, and it turns out that the number one county is Los Angeles, which is that, red spot. And then this Maricopa County, which is where Phoenix is number 2 in the nation. And I believe that the Miami is number 3. But it's kind of unfair because they've split up New York City into 5 boroughs. So each one of them does not quite, but when you combine them, we really have a lot of, probably the most people there. Alaska is considered one big district. They only process it as if it's one election district. There's so few people there. This does not appropriately include Wisconsin because they do a very weird thing by having so many, I think around, 3,000 precincts, and each one is its own district according to the database. So we have to break that up by county and other things, but essentially they're pretty cooperative. All right, next. We have primaries coming up. The ones that were in May, are already over with. But we have on the 5th, Alabama, California, Iowa, Mississippi, Montana, New Jersey, New Mexico, and San Diego, South Dakota, sorry. And the ones that are underlined have some sort of audit process. That's why I've underlined them here, which we have a chance of forcing them to audit themselves. So we don't have to do, you know, it's kind of, if you find out when they're auditing themselves or supposed to be auditing themselves, and then watch that very carefully, is a strategy that we've been doing. And so basically you're talking about two things here: direct oversight of election workers, whether it be at the polls or at the central office, and then access and review data files. Now, since so many things are done by computer today, looking at those data files has become a much more important thing to do. You can look at the workers all you want. It looks like they're doing fine. But back in the computer, you can have maybe thousands of votes move from one candidate to another. And so this is when we developed this thing called the Snapshot Protocol, which is essentially looking at the snapshot data file, which we've identified as the key data file that we need to look at, and then comparing that with the audit results. But let's go through each one of these. And indirect oversight, we can go to the polling place, and one of the things I'll go to maybe more closely here, I can't remember which slides I've got, but one of the key activities is to close down your polling place. I know I have a list of some details for these, but you go in at 7:55, just before 8 p.m. Then they lock the doors. You say you're an observer, and in some places you may have to sign up to be an observer. So you're going to need to find out for your region, your state, whatever it is, what you're going to need to do. But you can usually check with them and say, I'm going to be observing during your closure. And then you go in at 7:55, they close the doors, and you can just sit there and watch them take care of the ballots and the forms and stuff. This is actually a pretty key thing, because from our work and our what we did was we reviewed 5% of the precincts in San Diego County, which is 85 precincts, and we found out that only 15% of the time did the polling place workers actually add everything up and get it right. So we're talking about the number of blank ballots that they originally issued should equal the number of still blank ballots at the end, plus the voted ballots, plus the spoiled ballots. So that should all equal out, and only 15% of the time did they actually add that up. Hey, it sounds like that should be simple, but it's actually sort of difficult to get right. And it makes me wonder how much we can rely upon precincts if they're actually counting the vote, if they're that bad on adding things up. But also the other thing that we were doing in an activity a number of years ago, we went to a whole bunch of polling places, not at the close, but during the process, to look at the voter guides that were being either made available to them, or essentially how they were conducting the election. I'll show you a checklist of things in a minute. And then there's the chain of custody, how the ballots are moved from the polling place to the office, and then how they're dealing with them there, and also the vote by mail, how it's coming in. And then vote by mail processing is, in terms of signature verification, you can look at that. But I'll show you the steps that you can look at. And of course, the provisional ballot processing. And I didn't put it on here, but this year, and it's later, this year we're dealing with, in California especially, and some other states are introducing it as well, is same day registration. So people will be able to register on that day. And they don't have to process it that day, but they are allowed to register and vote, and then they can process as many registrations as they can. But let's face it, if it's a really critical election, they are going to allow that to go through. They're going to have to process it always. And it turns out that a set of eyes like this, like your eyes, are one of the most psychologically active things. I think maybe a video camera is even more. But if you photocopy this and put it up on the wall next to an honor system, say coffee nook, then they found that just by photocopying a set of eyes and putting it on the wall, the donations went up 3 times just by seeing the eyes. So it's really very important just for you to be there, even if you don't see something. And it's what I'm calling the police car effect, where if there's a police car on the freeway who drives the speed limit, the police probably thinks, everybody always drives the speed limit no matter where they are. But of course they know that as soon as the police car is in there, then everybody picks it back up. And when you're there, you may not see anything, but just by being there, you're actually stopping maybe some stuff going on that would otherwise occur. I like to try to bring in a video camera, and they're in California, they're trying to clamp down on this, but it takes a lot of assertiveness on our part to get these cameras in. Here is actually the manual tally room, and I was able to set up my camera years ago and watch them. I mean, there's nothing you can really see there that's going to identify voters or anything, and yet they're still very restrictive. The key area that we need to go to is in the random selection meeting, where they're picking what precincts are going to be actually voted in. So let's go over the snapshot oversight procedure, which is what we're recommending for those states that have audits. You have to have access to the snapshot file, which is the one critical file that you need, because I'm not sure if you can see my cursor over there, but the snapshot file is essentially a data file of the results that they're going to use for comparing with the 1% manual tally audit. And they've been changing this around due to the oversight that we've done. And typically, at least in San Diego, but other counties are doing better. In San Diego, they're using the unofficial semifinal results. Actually, it should be the official semifinal results, but they're semifinal in that it's only election night, what's happened at the polls, and the early vote by mail ballots, those ballots that have come in before election night and have been processed by that time. Even if the ballot came in before election night and they haven't actually processed the signatures, those are not going to be processed yet. Most of the ballots that are mailed in, like on election day, you still have 3 days for that to get to the office in California. Some states are not that lenient. Here, it has 3 days. As long as it was postmarked, they go up to the 3 days. And so you're going to have all those vote by mail ballots that are just turned in at the polling place or driven up to the election office on election day are not going to be included in this unofficial semifinal, the semifinal canvass results. A number of ballots in the last, say the 2016 primary, I happen to know off the top of my head, was 285,000 ballots that were not processed as of election night. And they don't get processed for a number of weeks. And so this is something that a lot of the media assumes that those first election night results are going to be indicative of the rest of the election. But actually, we have a long way to go before the close of election. They like to be able to, call it a horse race it on TV and so forth on election night, but it takes weeks before they're all done. But we need the snapshot file, which needs to correspond to the manual tally results. You can't check what they're manually tallying against a computer report unless you have that computer report. And for years, they were not able, you couldn't get the computer report because they didn't publish it. And so then they do a partial manual tally of that first part of the election, which doesn't correspond at all to the file that we had to look at. So then we started demanding this snapshot data file, and a lot of them dragged their feet and kicked their heels and, so forth. But that is essential so that we can compare it to what they're supposed to be getting and have a check on this. So that's essentially the core of the snapshot process, is to get that snapshot data file. So it needs to correspond with what they're tallying, but what we'd like to have is the full report, so that the total at the bottom is the total from what they're claiming happened, and then sorted or broken down by precinct and race, and so that we have the total number. And ballot type, meaning whether it's vote by mail or polling place ballot. And we we can dig into that data file and just pull out the precincts. It takes a little bit of sophistication because they're usually just so big. Most programs won't handle that size file, but they're not that hard to deal with. One person can have a huge footprint, especially in other states. One person worked with me in Florida a number of years ago, and she was able to pretty much organize the whole state with enough people to cover a lot of those counties just to go in. And, you know, one person can actually do a lot in overseeing that county. They do a audit process in Florida, but it's only one race chosen randomly and only 1% of the precincts in that race. So it's a really minimal audit process. And you kind of have to be there in person because, you know, you bring in a camera, there's no real substitute for being there with a camera to record what they're doing. There really isn't. And then other people can help you review it. The random selection meeting is really important in Florida, especially because they're only choosing that one race. And so if they choose it according to what they want, they're just going to avoid the race that they may have fixed. So what you want to do is have it be completely random. And it doesn't have to follow a random distribution so much as it has to be a surprise to them. Unfortunately, they put so many, you know, races on the ballot, like judgeship races where no one is really running. It's one person on the ballot. That's usually what they wind up with is a race that is not that important. So this flow chart that I'm showing here is essentially what we're looking at, where the voter does either complete a ballot, or if they're using one of these touch screens, they have what's called a voter verified paper audit trail, piece of paper they can look at to verify their ballot is, you know, their vote was correct. And then you can see here the numbers approximately. I just now say it's about 30, 30, 30, 10 in terms of what's going on. The early vote by mail ballots, and then the polling place ballots. That's what's included in that semifinal canvass results. Some of the counties are being very cooperative now, and they're going on and auditing the rest of these things. And as for example, San Bernardino, I've been working with them, and they're just a joy to work with, really, compared to working here in San Diego. But they scan these. We get a by precinct computer report, and they publish these results. But we want to get the snapshot file, which is whatever they're doing in their manual tally process for each stage of it. And then we take custody of that before they do the random precinct selection. And that's important that we get the results first so that then they can't modify it after they find out what precincts are going to be tallied. Because it would be easy if they chose this first, then they would just avoid those precincts. And this was being done in Fresno. They would choose the precincts 2 months in advance and publish it on the website. Sacramento, they don't do a random selection in the last elections. They just choose them according to what they like. So it's just a choice by the election official, which if they're compromised, and she certainly does seem to be, Jill Levine up there, she just chooses them to what, you know, maybe not the precincts that they fixed. So we would never have a check on it. So this is the type of thing that we really need to start pushing. And the trouble is they don't just change. You know, you have to really work at it to get them to make any changes, unless they're cooperative. So they do the manual tally. We have the computer results, and then we compare them. And that means that if they do it on their own, then they just ignore any discrepancies. Or what they were doing in Los Angeles is rescanning any of these that did not compare, getting a new computer report so then it compares, and then saying everything is fine. In Chicago, Dr. Laura up there, Dr. Laura Chamberlain that we've been working with, witnessed them on their tally sheets just stopping the tallying at a certain point. and when they got the number that they wanted, and then when the next few ballots came through, they wouldn't tally them, so that they would. So this is essentially the process here, which is simple. All we're doing is just comparing ourselves with what they should be doing, but we're getting the report before they make the random choice, and then checking that they're comparing it. A simple thing, but it takes a little bit of work to understand what exactly we need to do. Now, in general, if getting information from these election officials, if you need to ask for it, what I found that works the best, and I just did it yesterday with Michael Vu because they were not answering my letter. You make 2 copies, you hand carry one in, and you have them time stamp it at the front desk. That way you have proof that they've received it. And then that tends to give them a little bit more. If you just email it in, what I find here is they don't acknowledge it. They act like they can blow it off because you're not going to be able to prove it. But if you take in the hard copy, get them to stamp it on their own stamp, which is their official reception stamp, then you have evidence that you brought it in. And it's easy if you're close enough to the office. It's better than like certified mail or registered mail or something else. You just do it, and it's free too. Now we have the public records request, which is to get documents that already exist. That's one of the tools. The other one is to ask questions directly through this thing called Election Code 2300, which basically I'm going to go over here. This is called, it's a part of the Voters' Bill of Rights, and we're actually looking at just section number 9A, A9. And there's 2 parts. It says we have the right to ask questions about the procedures and to observe the process. Of course, it doesn't say they have to answer the questions. We have the right to ask them. But the next one is even more important. We have the right to ask questions of the precinct board and elections officials regarding the procedures and to receive an answer. That's important, to get an answer. It's too bad they didn't include that in the first paragraph. And otherwise they have to go to the appropriate person to get an answer. But of course they can always say that we're asking persistently and we're disrupting them. So then it may take sometimes years to get these questions answered, but we have to be persistent. At the polling place, here's the guidelines I was referring to earlier. Basically, you need to let them know that you're there. I will say that we used to try to do the thing of everybody wearing shirts that say Citizens Oversight and so forth and being an official watcher. But especially at the elections office, it was better if we did not all go in as one group, because then they limit how many people of each group can come in. So it's sort of better for you to, we can work together, but, and at the polling place, it doesn't matter because you're not going to have a whole bunch of people at one polling place. You want to divide yourself up. But essentially, you want to document if there's any persuasion tools around. It's electioneering is against the law. Anything closer to 100 feet to the polling place, such as signs and placards and anything handouts, you can't do anything next to the polling place. One thing that we had trouble with was a lot of voter guides, especially at churches. If they put the polls in the churches would have their church voter guide for how they want their parishioners to vote. And then in some places, they would actually put the polling place up on the altar under the cross and all this. It's like a ridiculous place for a polling place. But, and some people were just spooked out by going up to the altar. I think it did, it denigrates the altar, in front of the church to put the polling information up there. It should be in a separate room that's more or less not, religious, but they're allowed to have crosses and stuff in sight. It's just that, it can be intimidating for some people or just inappropriate. And then also, of course, the long lines. If there are long lines at the thing and you see that it's out of control, then we need to really document how far out of control that is. And that may take a lot of work to maybe take some data in terms of how long this line is at different parts of the day. Then there's a sign-in process. And there's some tips here. It's okay if people see the names really, because at all times you can go to a database and find out if every voter has voted. So I know they don't allow cameras and so forth in the room because it can be intimidating, but essentially it isn't a secret whether you voted or not. It's a public piece of information. But expect that you're not going to be able to bring your video camera and camera into the polling place. And to see, you know, if we want to find out if the registration is or is not found, because we are talking about same-day registration, and this is the first year they're implementing it. So it's going to be something we really need to look at in California. And then are they checking, like, do they know if this is the right voter? There it is such that you have to essentially have your ID and so forth when you register, and they do check that with the databases. So it should not be the case that you can register without being a valid voter. The voter ID problems that they've had is that not everybody can get the ID that they've been requiring, and it was a gaming of the system to try to reduce the number of people voting. So then at the opening and close, as I mentioned, there's the count of ballots, which rarely was ever balanced. And if you're there, you can kind of insist on them figuring out why they don't have it balanced. And as I said, enter it at right before polling. Now, you do have the right to observe all processing. So if you need to kind of think about, okay, where are they doing this? Sometimes at a computer terminal, and then find out if you can get in there and look at it. You do have to get an observer badge if you want to go into the non-public areas, and some of them do have a training. I can say like Orange County has a nice training for any observer, and they're very, very good about it there. Some of them are great, you know, others not so good. And then we're going to go through this in a little more detail, but there's a vote by mail sorting that first happens, and they do signature checking. They do sometimes do this ballot alteration, remarking, and whiting out. And our records kept, and we're against this whole thing in terms of modifying or you know, altering a ballot when it comes in. But it does look like with these old ballot styles, there's reasons to do that. And then the different scanning methods, the older scanning methods have individual dots on the page and very simplistic detectors that will pick up whether the dot is there, kind of like the Scantron forms. You know, they may only have like 5 detectors across the row, and then it just pulled through and they detect it. Nowadays, they're taking a snapshot, like a photograph of the whole ballot, and then having some more sophisticated software to determine if the votes are there. That works a lot better because it can do some higher level heuristical thinking to figure out how the voter voted. And it seems like, as I say, every election office, different one is a new challenge, or especially in California, they have these little fiefdoms set up, and the election officials are very different in how they run things. I guess I don't need to go over this much more, but we get the semifinal canvas snapshot data file prior to random selection. You can download it to the website or get the CD in person. This is the important part, we need to attend the random selection meeting. We got that pretty well covered in San Diego, but I'm going to need somebody to actually record it here, because I'm going to have to be in court on that day. Notice that they've scheduled me a day in court, so I can't give as much oversight. They're supposed to give public notice, and Susan has been doing a great job of finding the days, and we will go over that in a minute. I guess I'll unmute Susan. Susan, did you find the time and date for San Diego? Do you happen to know?
Yes, I found it. I'm not going to be able to tell you right off the top of my head, but I think it's June 7th or June 6th, and it's on the website. It was posted yesterday.
Okay, good. All right, thanks. I'm going to mute you back again because you have background noises sometimes. So that may make it easier for me. If it's going to be June 6th, then I can do both things. A lot of them are saying no video recording in the random selection meeting room. This is really absurd. I know they can control cameras in some parts of it, especially like signature verification and so forth, and just because they don't want it creeping out the workers. But this is a public meeting, and so what we really need to do is for those places where they're not allowing it, we need people to be assertive enough so that it raises, so it becomes a conflict, and then they have to take action against you, maybe in an arrest or something else, that then we can take it to court. I know that sounds like a lot, but it really isn't that bad if you are into going through that. Again, watching the auditing process, there's very key things. One is a random selection meeting. One is what they do when they complete the audit of, the tallying. What happens? Do they compare it with the computer result? And then if it's off, do they just rescan the ballots and get a new number that they then compare with and discard the old computer result? That's wrong if they do that. Or do they attempt to fit the tally to the data? Do they say, well, you're a little bit high, see if you can find out where you got an extra vote? And then they try to fit it to the computer report. Ballot images is becoming a very important aspect of our election integrity work. Some of the counties are making full ballot images, and they are required supposedly per the federal laws, that they're supposed to keep everything, all the electronic data, for pretty much forever for these elections. The machines do make the ballot images, but they've been discarding them, or after they're made, actually erasing them, and it takes an effort to erase them. So it's not something that they have to go through something to keep them. They actually have to try to erase them. And so we have been getting these images kept in some areas, and if they're not keeping them, then filing a lawsuit to force them to keep the ballot images. We're not yet sometimes able to get to the ballot images to review them, but some of these counties make them available no problem. In Dane County, Wisconsin, they make all the ballot images available, and then anybody can review the election. It's a good thing to do because it lets the public review the election. I mentioned same-day registration. I don't know what's going to go awry on this yet because we haven't been watching them. It hasn't happened before. Are they going to process them at all? Are they going to try to process some of them? Are they going to only process them in close races? But it is a good law because it's going to thwart some of the rigging that goes on, where you have to be registered, by May 21st for the June 5th date. Some states it's like a month before. And so if you're a last minute type person that goes, oh my God, is there election? And then, oh, sorry, you're not registered yet. So it's going to eliminate that. And it's also going to eliminate a lot of the rigging in terms of what party you are, because you can just change. You can say, well, I've decided to change party. I'll just re-register right now. And then they'll give you the right. You're already registered. You're a legitimate voter. You're allowed to register on the spot. So they should be able to allow you to change party at any time. And then that will eliminate any of the party, the gaming that goes on with the party to some extent. And I went one too far. Go back. This was a map created, thank you to Susan for this, where we looked at the same-day registration across the country and where it has been implemented that we could tell. And it's not as clear-cut as this because there's so many different variations on the theme in terms of how they're implementing it. But it is, I think, something that we really need to continue to push for more of, because it does, as I said, it does eliminate a lot of the rigging that can go on with the election. So that ends that presentation. Now I wanted to just show you a couple of clips out of this video. And let's see. if I get it started. Now I want to go up here to around 40 minutes, which is where we're seeing the whiting out process. I got a new camera, so it's got a better resolution than what I had been doing before. So this guy here takes his whiteout device and he applies whiteout to the votes on the ballot. The thing I think that is why that, let me mute this. The reason this is happening in this case, it looks like it's also a Vietnamese, or I think that's Vietnamese writing, is because the voter didn't understand that they weren't supposed to also write in the name. So every single vote, every single race, they wrote in the person that they were voting for. It matches the vote. So it was a failed process from the voter. And so maybe that's okay. But the problem is here, they're not keeping track of any of this. This guy could be whiting out the votes for anybody. And then let me just snapshot this without running it to a couple more scenes. This machine in the background is the big sorting machine where they process the vote by mail ballots and sort them. The ballots are already sorted from the polling place, so they don't have to do any sorting, but the vote by mail ballots, they have to sort them. In San Diego, they were not sorting by precinct, which makes it very difficult to then correlate that to the report that we're able to get, which is by precinct. This one looks bigger, like there's more bins in it, sorting bins, and so maybe they could sort it by precinct. There are about 1,600 precincts, so you'd have to sort of do it in phases if they did do that. But then later, I was able to we'll look at this flow chart on the wall. If I can get up there, there we go. So they have the scanning. They scan the mail ballot envelopes first. They do the signature check, which is in another room. They do verification of, and they call this reconciliation, which I hate it when they use that word without telling us what it is. But essentially, they check the signatures, then bring them back and open them, take them out, take a look at them, and then finally scan them and tabulate them. What I've been doing at this place is zooming in. This camera zooms in really well and gives a super high resolution, so I can see some of what's going on as they process, looking at the ballots. And they put this way back in the room, so it was hard for us to really see what they're doing. I mean, they have windows at the very far end, but it's not, as you can see in this next picture, it's hard to see, very close because these people are way in the back. And they have a bunch of stuff here blocking what they're doing, just not that great in terms of visibility, which then I start to worry what's going on, especially with Michael Vu at the helm. In the next room, they were doing some remaking of ballots, and you may want to just watch this video and try to get it, because looking at it, you will get a better feeling for things that are going on. But these two ladies right here that are in the center of the view were remaking ballots. It does look like they're checking them. Like one is reading off, the other one is making a new ballot for some reason. And they are keeping a log sheet. That was what was going on there. And I was noticing the boxes in the back. This is like the San Diego 3rd District. And maybe those are the precincts, I'm not sure. Those look kind of like precinct numbers, but they're a little bit too big. then San Diego, there was 1,500 precincts. And so I asked all these questions, but they refused to answer. And so that's what makes it hard for us. This next room, I'm not sure what's going on there. They have just some computers set up and on with printers next to them. And maybe that's going to be for signature review, if they're going to be doing it there. Later, this could be either deck, that is batch number, or precinct number. I can't really tell if how they're sorting them yet. And let's see. This is the guy that we actually were watching with his whiteout pen. Just going to town there with whiting out. So, and no one watching what he's doing. So we're documenting that it is occurring again. That's mostly what I got there. I did watch the ladies in the front here who were, let me get to part of that. So you can see what they had to go through. Let me get to where I was on the other side. Okay, here's a section we can just play a little bit. And then this will be it, and then we'll go to questions. But they have to, in San Diego, hand insert these ballots into these scanners, which were originally built only just to use at the precinct. And so they're really a light duty scanner. The counties that are using it now, see, there was an error. He had to press the button and delete it and then bring it back and try it again. Happened again. So he has to press it again, bring it back, and try again. So they have to notice that there's a problem and then try again to get it to finally go. And so you're relying upon these people to pick up only one ballot at a time, push it in, and if there's a problem, then reset it and get the ballot back. That's so monotonous that it almost makes a human brain turn into a mush. So it's hard to really do it right hour after hour. And then finally, this, I'll just note this again of this guy who was doing, he looks like he's just doing a quality check because every ballot through he resets it. I don't know if it's failing or if it's okay. But he does that to every ballot. And then he's the guy who is just, having fun whiting out so much. Okay, so that is sort of the overview of what I wanted to try to process here. And now what I want to do is have any questions. So let's unmute people. And if you're not talking, then maybe don't mute your own phone. Let's see if I can. Okay, so now, does anybody have any questions? Just go ahead and speak up if you do.
Do I have sign up anywhere to be observer?
Okay, wait a second. First, who are you and what are?
I'm in Alameda County.
You're Benita? Are you Benita?
Liz Raybuck.
Oh, Liz. Okay. Yeah, good. Thank you. I wondered how you pronounce that. And if not, how can I go? Oh, here we go.
Do I have to sign up anywhere to be an observer?
If you want to go into the election office, then you're going to have to ask them to go in. And they usually do just give you a badge and invite you to observe different areas. So yeah, if you're going to go into the office, you have to ask them. We are not official observers. In other words, we are not sanctioned by the authorities to do this. We're just doing it because we have the right to. And so, so we're not going to have, there is a certain thing, which is an official observer from parties and the like that have that certain status. And in certain states, they have different rules. So I'm just speaking for California, because Lise, where are you?
I'm in Alameda County. Alameda County.
Yeah, Alameda. Okay, yeah. So it's Tim Dupay that is your registrar of voters, and he's actually been very uncooperative about allowing cameras into the 1% manual tally room. But that's the key thing that we kind of need to do there. But if you want to just go in and observe at the election office, I invite anybody to just go in and say, I'm an observer, I'd like to get a badge and watch. And they will generally give you a badge and let you watch in, designated areas. The reason I wanted to go through this is so that you would know what those areas are. And, if you are, let me go back to just a second. Let me stop share. So essentially, Lise, the reason I went through it is so that you can know what they may not be showing you, because that's a good thing to try to figure out, is what is what they're showing you, but also what they're not showing you. And sometimes that's the more important thing, is what they're not willing to show you. So you need to try to understand what the full processing is so that you can see each phase of it. During these first days of the election, they're going to be processing vote by mail ballots right now. So a lot of people don't understand that they should go in and start providing oversight right away. At least come in part of the time. You don't have to spend all day there, but come in, try to understand what the process is and see the aspects of it. And then make notes and then check back with us if you see anything that looks weird. We didn't even know about this whiting out of the ballots until last season. And now we're seeing it as if it's just a standard practice that they're doing all the time. It makes us really worried. And then once they complete the election, then there's that random tally meeting, random selection meeting. We're getting the dates of those. And yes, I did get the spreadsheet from Susan on that. And maybe while I'm talking, I can kind of still look for it and maybe pull it up. But she did get a lot of the dates figured out in terms of when exactly they're going to be. And some of them a lot of them are in this first week after the election, like the upcoming week. But some of them have split it up or are doing it at different times, and so it isn't as clear cut. I should have had that prepared and ready for us to take a look at that. But what we'll do is we'll take care of distributing that information now that we're starting to get it available, so that we know exactly what the dates are for each one of the counties. And what we need to do is get the people to try to have individuals that are ready to try to bring in their video cameras to those meetings, especially in one like Alameda. We need somebody who's kind of gutsy and willing to do a little bit of civil disobedience to bring in their camera to try to video record that meeting that we really have a right to go into, and there's no rationale for keeping us out of the meeting with our cameras. You are allowed to go in, but what can you prove if you go in there and you see something that looks weird if you don't have it actually recorded? If we need to go to court, we need that recording. We need to then make a transcript of it so that we can have that for a court record that we can put in as evidence as what's going on. Right now you can go in and observe right away and see what's going on at the election office. On election day, a really good thing to do is go to the polling place and shut them down. Then go to the election office later on and watch them process the polling place ballots as they come in. If you're really energetic, you can stay there pretty much all night and watch them process the polling place ballots. It's actually pretty interesting if you can keep your eyes open. And then finally, there's the post-election process, which goes on for weeks after that. And that's where, you know, people come in right after the election and they want to volunteer, thinking it's only for one day, but it actually goes on for a number of weeks. So we need to try to distribute our volunteers out so that we're not just concentrated on that first day, but able to cover, you know, more of the days if possible with people that are volunteering. At the last primary, you know, the season in 2016, we had a lot of people because, you know, Bernie Sanders had a lot of volunteers that were really hot to trot. And so we had a lot of attention right away, and then it, you know, fades down as you go on, but it takes them they have 29 days, 30 days or so to complete the actual tally of the election. And that's all the later vote by mails and the provisionals, which is in San Diego was 285,000 ballots. It's a huge chunk of the election, about 40% of it. So yeah, so it's, and also I wanted to reemphasize that you don't have to sign up with Citizens Oversight to do this. We found that it's better if you just come in as an individual, especially at the election office, because otherwise they start to limit how many people from affiliated with us can come in. And so we don't, you know, wear t-shirts and stuff that say Citizens Oversight when you're in there. You can't wear like a pro or against, you know, you couldn't wear like a Bernie Sanders for president t-shirt in the election office. None of that is allowed. So you have to come in. It's a nonpartisan activity. Citizens Oversight, we're nonpartisan. We're not fighting for one candidate or another, but we will fight for appropriate election laws that will allow these elections to be processed properly as legislation. Okay, so did that answer your question, Lise?
Yes.
Okay, good. And thank you very much for being involved. I know you've been around for a lot of time when we've rubbed shoulders, so I appreciate that. Okay, now there's a way to raise hands here. And instead of trying that, what I'm going to do is unmute a few people here and see if there's anyone else that wants to ask a question. Okay, does anyone else? I think I can't seem to unmute some of them. Okay, there we go. We're all unmuted. Anybody want to ask a question?
Well, this is Pat. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hi, Pat.
Hi. It's not a question. It's more a comment about how everything that these dishonorable people do that are the insiders.
Oh, yeah.
Everything they do leads to less accountability and makes it harder for us to do any transparency. And I want to point out in particular, we used to have to run those ballots. They used to run them at each polling place on the night of the vote. The moment they switched all that to their central tallying, they destroyed or they made us all depend heavily on the what do you call it, chain of custody for ballots. And that's a huge, huge loss to our ability to make sure that our elections are tallied properly. the moment we lose sight of our ballots before they are counted and publicly reported, that is when we lose, I am saying, most of our ability to really track our votes. And unfortunately, even the scanning that we are trying to get, you know, the scanning of all ballots nowadays would happen much after they have already done all of the whiteouts and all of their ballot tampering and all of their hiding or enhancing ballots, whatever you want to call it, behind closed doors. Because the moment our ballots leave our site at the polling places, we have lost track of our ballots. And we cannot each of us follow the trucks that take these ballots into the polling, into the central voters place. So I just get very anxious because I can see that they consistently do this to us. Also, this time they have wiped out most of our polling places. My polling place is gone. They've consolidated it so that, you know, we are wiping out more and more ability to verify the vote before it leaves the polling place. I just wanted to say that because we need to keep our eye on the ball where these people are always trying to cheat us. Thank you.
Yeah. Now I want to acknowledge Patricia for being such a great volunteer for this particular activity, especially, and who now has become very sophisticated in her ability of watching and understanding what's going on. So I really appreciate you being here, Pat, and I'm looking forward to working with you over the next few weeks. And what you say, I believe, is exactly right. And especially it was brought out as I was studying the election law, because the election law actually assumes that each one of these precincts has a precinct board, which is a sort of an autonomous group of people who are, you know, sort of like officials that are going to be taking care of that precinct in its entirety, including totaling up the ballot. And then it used to be they'd phone them in. So it used to be that there wasn't any vote by mail ballots, and you would count everything at the precinct and then phone it in. And then, you know, really, if you were going to fix the election, you'd have to go out and try to get all these precinct boards to cooperate. And now, because we've gone to vote by mail balloting so much, and that's one of the kinks in the theory that we can, you know, what you've been talking about, that once the ballots leave our eyes. Yeah, well, most people, they put them in the envelope. They prefer to vote that way because it's convenient. And actually, it does increase voter turnout wherever they use vote by mail, because it's, as I say, it's more like a take-home test rather than a pop quiz. It's easier for people to sit down, and I actually prefer it because I can sit down, you know, with my wife. We go over the issues, we kind of talk about it, and it's fun. But then you have to turn them in and then trust that the central office and the election officials will do the right thing. And from what we've seen, this is a very, very questionable thing going on in terms of how the election officials are handling it. Now, so that was good. Let's see. I don't know how you're supposed to be able to raise hands, but I don't see hand raising going on. So let me unmute everybody. There's one button to do that. And can anybody who wants to ask a question or say something, go just jump in right now.
Elisa Brent from San Diego.
Oh, hi. Hi, Lisa.
I was wondering if you have volunteers in each of the precincts, or the districts, or I guess it would be counties, to oversight each of the registrars.
Do we have, so the question was, do we have oversight volunteers in each one of the counties? Well, if you're talking about just California, and as I said, the we're looking at 175 counties across the nation, but in California, we're talking about looking at just the top 24 counties out of 58. All right. And that means we're neglecting 34 of the counties. So we're not even up to half. But in the 24 counties that we're targeting, we do capture 92% of the vote, which is a pretty good coverage. So it takes 34 other counties to get those eight people. And let me mute Benita here because she seems to be giving us extra noise. Sorry. So in terms of answering your question, Elisa, do we have volunteers in each one of those counties? For most of them we do, but we're trying to make sure that we have enough volunteers to cover the time and also seasoned volunteers that start to know what's going on in each one of these counties. Some of the counties have been very, very uncooperative and will kick people out that try to do the observing or have them arrested. This was the case in Sacramento. Some of them were uncooperative, like Fresno, by publishing their selection of random tallies 2 months before the election, making it so that any hacker can just avoid them. So there is this group called the California Association of Clerks and Election Officials, which is all these sort of tainted election officials and sort of a conspiracy of election officials in California to try to minimize what they do, try to minimize oversight, change the laws so that they don't have to do very much, and therefore reduce the quality of the product that they're turning out, and making it so that we have no clue whether it relates to the actual vote or not. And in Los Angeles, which is the #1 county in the nation by far, they are about 3 times larger than San Diego, so they dominate California. But California is #2 in the state, so we're still very, very important. In Los Angeles, after they did the 1% manual tally, they would rescan those ballots and get the new report and compare only with the new report and then act like nothing was a problem. It essentially would cover up any big hack. If you wanted to hack that election and you were an insider, could get to the data, you could manipulate it any way that you want. And then that may change the entire state. But usually what we've seen most of the time, what we're trying to do is put a lid on that type of activity and watch what's going on and stop it. Now, I sent a letter to the LA registrar saying that we were aware that they were doing this improperly to the point where it would just actually cover everything up, and hopefully they will be changing. Some of the officials, like Michael Vu, like he won't talk to me, the county won't talk to me anymore because I'm somebody that sues them. So it's harder to, and that's another reason why it's nice to have other volunteers that are not associated with Citizens Oversight, at least, not a t-shirt or something going in, so that you can act autonomously and maybe you'll get better results talking to them. But no, we do want to have more people in these other counties providing oversight like this. There's nothing partisan or anything about it. All we're trying to do is get these election officials to do the right thing. So hopefully that answers your question.
Hey,
Okay.
Ray?
Yeah.
This is Pat again. It just occurred to me, who has the ability to remove Michael Vu? Isn't it the County Board of Supervisors?
The way I understand it, and I could be wrong about this, but that is an appointment made by the chief administrative officer of the county, and her name slips my mind right now.
But he was originally put there by Michael Haas, and he was also an unelected person.
No, I think he was a guy before, but they appoint them. I think it's the chief administrative officer that does the appointment.
And that person is not elected, right?
No, I mean, yes, that's correct.
So who put her in there? Isn't it the county board of
The
supervisors?
the county board of supervisors puts in the chief administrative officer, and then the chief administrative officer pretty much has carte blanche control over the whole county operation.
So we need to aim at those people and get them out. But of course, a lot of them are going to be termed out, which is good.
Well, the board of supervisors can ask them. I mean, I think they should be able to ask that a person be removed. I mean, it's terrible that we have this system where the board of supervisors has very little say in what the chief administrative officer does. And the chief administrative officer hired Michael Vu after only 2 months of being unemployed after having to leave Cuyahoga County, which 2 of his subordinates were convicted of this sort of pre-stacking the ballots fraud. So it's the same sort of thing that we caught him doing here and took him to court and won. So, and we're still trying to get to, and let me give you an update. We are having the court hearing on the 7th of June at 1:30 p.m. in Department 903, which is in the brand new courthouse. And there we will be still asking to review the ballots in the 2016 primary election. And I had some new interest from Roque de la Fuente, who was a presidential candidate who had, if you noticed on the post that I've given, his numbers were going up to like in the county in Texas. It's where Austin is. I can't think of the name of it. It starts with a T.
Travis County.
Travis County. Okay, good. He had gotten like 8,000 votes at maybe 35% counted. And then when it got up to 45% counted, he was down to only 108 votes. So somehow they subtracted 7,000 votes from his total. And he had 10% in all of the other counties. He was going at 10% there, and then his votes were taken away somehow and moved to other candidates that the machine wanted to win, apparently. Now, what you have here is Michael Vu, who is a compromised official who was already convicted. His subordinates were convicted in Cuyahoga County, so they have him, you know, if the evildoers, these fraudsters that are changing the elections, wanted him to do something, then he would have to do it, or else they would, expose him in these other cases. So that's why I think he might be manipulated. So it is going to be interesting if we get to these ballots, and at this hearing, we're going to be hopefully getting the judge to not dismiss the case. The county has asked for dismissal, and we filed the, opposition to that. And we'll be having the county reply to our answer to their opposition, I think, in the next couple of days before we go into the hearing. That's
at what time?
It's during the 1:30. They schedule them all for 1:30, okay. And there may be other cases that occur during that afternoon. But you should get there, before 1:30 so you can get into the courtroom and situated. It will really, really help to have people come to this meeting, this hearing, because this judge was, has been castigated by the district attorney in the past for not going along with the district attorney's wanting, rulings. And so she was papered over and not given any good cases, so to speak. So this is probably considered like a crappy case to do. And so by having the public come in, it will show her that, the public really is interested in this, and it isn't just a crappy case. We should be able to get to, I filed the contest on time. I've gone through, and basically any of the objections are just basically all absurd. So we'll see what happens on Thursday.
Right. Which courthouse is that? The address is at the 330, or which one?
It's actually on Union Street. So the one that's at that 330, which is
It's the 330.
sort of the new
West
one.
Broadway, right?
You know, the new courthouse, which is the civil courthouse that we usually go to for civil cases. It's behind that. So it's basically north of that on Union Street. So you can get to it from that building. You have to go up to, I think, the 3rd or 4th floor and then over a walkway and then back down. Or you can just walk into the building at street level. That's just right behind it. I'll circulate. That's a good point. I'll circulate some maps and stuff because it's now a new place to go to and people won't know how to get there.
Thanks.
I had a hard time finding it myself. All right, anything more? Let me go to unmute. Okay, anybody else who wants to ask a question or make a comment, and then let's see, it's 10:15.
Any questions about the oversight of the registrar?
Okay, who's talking? Who is this? Hello? Okay, so I started to hear someone, but I don't. Go ahead and introduce yourself and ask your question. Hello?
Ray, I think it was Galaxy J7 Prime, and I think she muted herself after that.
Okay, well, let me try unmuting her.
Might have been me, Elisa.
Oh.
I was asking my husband if he had any questions.
Oh, okay. Elisa, are you on Galaxy J7?
I'm assuming I didn't see my name on the list. Right, this is a new phone.
Okay. All right. So you don't have any questions?
No, you answered the one about San Diego, or California, rather.
Okay. Well, we are still seeking volunteers, in all areas. So I guess that is, I see Joey and Madge. Thank you for joining in a little bit late, but you can listen to the recording later if you have the time. Okay, so I think that'll do it. I want to thank everybody for attending the meeting. We will be, I kind of was trying to set these up before we go on for a standard time and date so that we can start to get more people planning to attend, and then we get a larger number of people attending as time goes on. And I think after the election, we're going to have better luck on attracting people because there's just right now so much going on with the end of the election. Everybody's in basically short strokes trying to get everything happening. So now I think we may move it a little bit because someone was, but if there was any time that you think would be really, really appropriate or better for you or something, if we can have you contact me later, then we'll try to pin down exactly when it's going to be. But it may be next Saturday. I like doing it in the morning on Saturday because it gets it out of the way. But we'll see, okay? All right, so thank you, everybody, and I appreciate your attendance.